Hello, and welcome to another edition of Razorwire. Today we're talking about the criminal element within InfoSec. It's something that you'll probably hear InfoSec people talk about from time to time, but we don't really kind of get into the nuts and bolts behind it, why they do it, that kind of thing. And it's been a question that I think a lot of people have asked in the past who are not in information security. Why do they do it? What's the motivation behind it? What type of people do this kind of thing and why, and maybe a little bit about, these kind of groups and how they operate, how they work. So today, for the first time, we have two new guests. We have Victor. Victor, do you want to kind of make an intro for yourself?
Sure, of course. Well, first of all, thank you for having me, James. I'm Victor Acin. I'm manager at the Labs department at Outpost 24 within the Threat Intelligence business unit.
Fantastic. Just the man we need for this type of discussion. And long-term friend of mine, Richard, who you may have seen in some of our previous videos. Richard, do you want to kind of give yourself a bit of an intro?
Yeah, James, absolutely. Pleasure to be here, my friend. It's been far too long. So what do I do? Gosh, what do I not do? I'm currently VP of technology for a large data analytics company. Was recently accepted onto the Forbes Tech Council, which was a nice accolade. But I'm saving all the good stuff for you, James, and your podcast. This is where it's at. But yeah, I've been in cybersecurity for 22 years. Funny enough, a great podcast. I studied psychology back at uni. So this is a subject close to my heart. And I've been part of breach teams. I've been part of incident response, major breach responses. And I used to go on the roadshow years ago, James, talking about the anatomy of an attack and the different types of cyber criminals and why they do what they do. So, as we'll learn in this podcast, not a huge amount has changed, just sophistication, but it'll still be an interesting chat nonetheless.
Fantastic. Right, well, let's get into it then. So, criminal activity. Let's face it, since the human race has been the human race, we've had our criminal element. You go back far enough, and it was usually because one tribe had a bit more stuff than other tribes, so that tribe would wander in, beat the hell out of the tribe with the stuff, take their stuff and wander off into the distance. As the human race progressed along, that never really changed. And when people started transiting goods from A to B, the bandits would come riding over the hill, firing their bows, and before you knew it, you'd lost half your stuff, most of your stuff, and half the people were killed. We fast forward many, many years, and larceny has been a significant part of pretty much every culture on the planet. In fact, every culture on the planet, apart from maybe some of the tribal stuff, sort of Aborigine, that kind of thing back in the day. But we have been robbing one another for many, many years, usually for assets, goods, and then eventually money when that was created. And it's pretty much stayed consistent all the way through. We've all seen the great films, especially the British films, about the London kind of criminal underground, the Cray twins, all the other stuff, all the protection rackets, drug running, gun running, all manner of stuff that the human race has decided is worthwhile for a few quid or dollars or whatever it is you may well, your poison may well be. And fast forward into the beautiful realm that we're in at the moment, the digital age, where we can communicate instantly and assets and amounts of currency can be transferred almost instantly over large distances. And digital assets, digital information has now become king. And as the criminal element has a tendency to evolve, it has indeed evolved in this digital world, and this is the world that we find ourselves in. We are, as a species, extremely reliant on technology now. We can't go back. This is it. We are reliant on our computers. We are reliant on digital currencies, or we're starting to get to that point. And all the underpinning services that make up our wonderful society. and we have our criminal elements. So I suppose we really start. Who are they? What are we looking at in this day and age when it comes to digital crime? Who wants to go first? Richard, do you want to kick off?
Yeah. So, yeah, you're right. Look, you've given history a very quick snapshot, right? But at the end of the day, these individuals, these groups, and we'll talk about who they are in a moment, they're after stuff, and that stuff is now digital. But don't underestimate that digital stuff can also map into physical assets, which we'll talk about a little bit later. But look, the industry really sees three significant group types, right? So the one that we kind of all know about is cyber criminals, right? The people that want the biggest bang for their buck, as it were, right? The spray and pray approach, the most reward for the least amount of effort possible. And that's where you typically see most of your ransomware kind of attacks, social engineering things happen, or the guys that prey on those that don't patch and find easy breach points and steal stuff. And stuff is a longer conversation, right? Because it isn't all about personal identifiable information. And then the other group that we know a lot more about, we're starting to see a resurgence of them based on the current geopolitical climate, are your hacktivists, right? Your politically, socioeconomic, motivated groups that don't do this for money per se, although the lines are being blurred a little bit at the moment because these groups do need to fund their activities and they're not getting it from government sources for the better part. And they're still around, but becoming a much bigger swell of problem to deal with. And the last kind of traditional group is what they used to call and still call the APTs, or the nation state groups. And for me, and we won't get into this right now because I'll let Victor also talk about his view on the different groups. They're the ones that have really caused the biggest problem historically. And they're probably every organization's biggest nightmare, just due to the insidious nature of how they operate and the phenomenal funding they'll have based upon, what's behind them. So from my perspective and what I've seen over the past 12, 15 years, they're the three core types of cyber criminal groups, if you like. Victor?
Yeah, no, I agree completely with you, Cassidy. Basically, sorry, Richard, apologies. I got confused with the surname. Basically, that's the way we classify them sort of as well, right? You have basically financially motivated groups, nation-sponsored groups, and then hacktivist operations. I'm not so sure whether the most dangerous group, the one we should be worrying about, are nation-sponsored, because there's elements in the three of them that are very disruptive, right? But that's usually the way to go about it, right? Not so much about their size or their targets, but basically their motivation, what drives the group to operate, and then what that will dictate how they will behave once they've stolen your data or they are within your company.
Well, this is it. And I mean, in many respects, there's a lot of blurred lines as well. There's a lot of movement between those groups, people can be in, a more kind of hacktivist group. There's certain elements in the world at the moment who are getting quite big on that, attacking certain nation states who are doing special operations. We're starting to hear a lot of movement around that, but a lot of them have been or still are part of other groups. That's where they earn their money. And, the hacktivist groups, they're the ones where they feel they're sort of doing what they need to do in order to make their mark or to help out in some way from states going on. And it seems to be rather dramatically increasing as well. We saw one of the most interesting things for me was the Conti leaks from Krebs on security, where obviously a very disgruntled individual who was part of a nation that was under attack from another nation, and seemingly a lot of those people in Conti were part of that other nation as well. In fact, should we just say it? A Ukrainian who was in the group with a load of Russians decided, I'm just going to push all of this out, and we saw all the stuff that came out of Krebs. I mean, what was your opinion when you saw? I take it you guys have read and looked through the chat files and the organization structures, that kind of thing.
Yeah, I mean, on our side, it was very interesting to get a glimpse at what actually goes on behind the curtain, right? It's not often you get to have these sort of insights. I believe the original rift inside the group appeared when, as you said, Conti started to move not so much to activist, motivation, but did claim to support Russia fully and attack any or try to target any of the allies of Ukraine. And I believe that's when the rift inside the group started to appear, right? When politics got in the way of money, sort of. I think that it was really, really interesting, basically, to be able to see or to have that peek behind the curtain, right? See how they treat their targets, how they discuss their tactics. That sort of information is basically what teams within companies need in order to be able to understand the enemy, to be able to sort of predict kind of their behavior.
Richard?
Yeah, what I found interesting about Conti leaks was, or the whole sort of scenario around it, was just how much politics was at play, right? How much, if you sit back as an organizational leader or somebody that owns data in a business, or you have a medial interest in cybersecurity, you kind of tend to sit back and see it as I want to monetize what it is that I do. But what we're actually seeing is a big shift in the politics of all of this, right? So, people will go after things that they have a political ideology in, even if it means taking food off their table or potentially putting themselves in a very difficult situation. And it just goes to show that the unpredictable nature of the world, and the landscape that we operate in as individuals and as businesses. And to go back to the original question, I will come back to Conti in a moment. The entertainment factor, think about what happened during lockdown, right? 2 years almost of house arrest for a lot of nations, a lot of people, right? And you've got, teenagers and younger adults, and I'm not just saying that's the group, it's a much wider demographic spread than that had more time on their hands than ever before, right? Couldn't go to school. And, if you go back to Mr. Robot and the sensationalist nature of, what hacking's all about, and the fact that we're getting a lot more press, it has increased a massive swell of interest amongst, the target demographic that would want to get involved. So the entertainment factor of just playing with code and seeing what you can do and creating some very big problems for some very big companies has become a bigger challenge, because we used to always talk about script kiddies back in the day, as being a niggling kind of a pain, at the side of the desk for organizations. Actually, it's one of the bigger risks today as well, because, as I said, the access to these tools due to various leaks from NSA and means actually a relatively unsophisticated, 18, 19, 24-year-old who's got some reasonably good coding skills, and, kids are getting better at that, becomes a big problem for organizations when they're thinking about who they're trying to protect themselves against. So there's two elements to that the response. One is, Conti showed the political nature and how we're changing from kind of your traditional, I want to monetize things, to actually, I have a real sort of belief in this and I'm going to go do something against the grain. And then you've got that big swell of entertainment behind it, where people have more time in their hands, they're learning to do more things, and they're starting to realize they can do stuff with these skills. They can start to potentially extort money, sell things on various channels. And that's building up a big headache for organizations, bigger than I think we've realized ever in the past 2 decades of cybersecurity.
Yeah, and to pile up on that, actually, now it's easier than ever even to get that entry point barrier, over the entry point barrier, right? With just $50, anyone can just go and buy access to the email of someone working at a company, for example, deploy their own RAT that they've purchased for $20 as well. So it's becoming just more of a more industrialized, service-oriented issue in which basically all of these cyber criminals are offering the services and trying to get a bit of that money back in any way they can.
Yeah, and I mean, it's a different world as well from what it was like in the 70s and 80s. I mean, let's go back to the criminals that operated then. It was very much by association. You knew who you were dealing with. You were introduced in quite commonly. And it was a relatively small, tight-knit group of people. They had their contacts outside. There was agreements between criminal gangs sometimes, but let's face it, that they probably didn't always work particularly well. In the digital age, it's a very, very different landscape. You can have hundreds of people as part of your criminal group, though, who have never met. They've not really been vetted, although I know that there is a lot of vetting that goes on with the bigger groups, the more organised groups. But as you guys say, it's relatively easy to get into. And whereas the risks in the 70s and 80s, if you're going to do over, say, a Hatton Garden, jewellery shop, you were worried about the police coming down and catching you in the act, or as you were legging it away with your ill-gotten gains. Nowadays, you don't have that. Our policing is not built to handle diverse individuals in diverse countries. I mean, yeah, okay, in the media, you occasionally get someone saying, "Oh, this person from this group has been caught." It's like, but that's just a drop in the ocean compared to the amount of people who are going to step into that position, waiting in the wings. And as you guys say, those training up to do that. I mean, some of these people, when you look at the intelligence behind it, and this is probably where it's good to move over to Victor, these aren't, just people sitting in the basement. This is always what gets me about like the whole kind of vendor imaging around this. The hoodie wearing individual sitting in the basement with the massive amounts of screens and matrix code all flipping around. Or if you're watching something like Hackers, floaty landscapes and people going around on skateboards and cracking in via phones in the underground. It's not like that. And although, there's a lot of sensationalization in the media, we are facing a point where it's very difficult for any organizational unit to police this, even half as efficiently as it could be when they're policing like physical crime, the more kind of crime that we're used to these days. I mean, Victor, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, I always found the image of the hacker with the balaclava typing furiously on the keyboard very funny. These guys are not. That's not the reality. They're more like employees of a company. We've been taking a look recently at one of the most infamous ransomware groups. Probably you've heard of it. It's called Hive. And they have a very serious product going on. They have an affiliate portal. They have a victim portal, a leak site. Their ransomware as a service operation consists on acquiring or getting affiliates that will do the dirt job for them, getting into companies, deploying the ransomware. And the way they have all of that is just so industrialized, so service-oriented. Just for you to understand, in a regular operation, after the affiliate has gained access to the company, they will just log in to the affiliate site and they will be able to just create the victim page and the leak page where they will publish data, stolen data if the company refuses to pay in just a couple of clicks. That will already generate the executable with the ransomware they have to deploy, with the ransom node created inside. Just everything is very automated and very automatized. And in the end, again, they're just trying to sell a service. They're trying to make a living, right? And they are obviously doing it really, really well.
Richard?
Yeah, so I want to bring it back to, because Victor's raised some, eyebrow-raising points, and people should take note, right, of just how easy it is to automate, right, the truly SaaS model of hacking, ransomware, etc. So let's talk about the psychology. Why has this come about, right? Well, first of all, there's the proliferation of blockchain and all that jazz, which has kind of allowed people to feel more comfortable in transacting their ransoms. There's the ability to obfuscate where you're coming from much more easily. I don't know if I want to mention Starlink and Elon Musk's view to kind of be the privacy warrior of the world. That's probably another podcast, James, but, no longer is the Great Wall of China a problem, the Great Firewall of China, rather, sorry. Mm-hmm. We truly are in an age where you can do anything anywhere. But the psychology is interesting because, to your point, way back in the day when I started playing with code, I'm talking early 90s, mid 90s, there were no laws at the time. The things that I were doing with various groups on various chat forums were not illegal. Obviously, if you steal stuff, then that was illegal. But now it is. Right now, there are laws that says you shouldn't do this. You can't, access these resources X, Y, Z. But do they care anymore, right? And psychologically, no, because they know they can hide behind a whole lot of obfuscation capabilities. And secondly, I'm not moving this to a capitalist discussion, but a lot of these groups, a lot of these people that are behind a lot of the activities we're seeing, if you look at the profile of your traditional attackers outside of cybercrime groups, they are typically growing up in places that aren't necessarily as affluent, right, as we would maybe think they are. They probably have an anti, movement against the police and law enforcement. So there's a lot of less respect there. And they know that they can be protected. They know they can outsource what they want to do to these other groups. And they know they can make money off of this thing relatively easy. I mean, I haven't monitored how much an email sells for these days or a credit card, but, by orders of magnitude, you can make a reasonable living in a very risk-free way than you ever have before, and all from the comfort of your keyboard, your laptop in any location in the world. That's the psychology. It's easy money and it's all outsourced. And that's a big problem for organizations. You may not think you'll be targeted. And well, if you still think like that, I would suggest you don't. But you just may get caught in that massive net of some person just having a go, paying $50 here, $20 there. And before you know it, you have a ransomware breach in your hands. And that's a bad day at the brand office for your organization.
It's actually quite interesting in how things have kind of gone full cycle. We're talking about the types of attacks that people are doing now. And, ransomware is obviously the big one. You go back, 10 years, and it wasn't really a thing. I mean, it kind of happened a few times, but, it was all about getting that database stuffed full of card information that you could then sell on the dark web and what have you. And we talked about protection rackets. Back in the day in London, if you owned a pub, some nice men would come. Well, maybe not so nice men would come down once a week and get their brown envelope and their pint, and they'd be off. And yes, your pub would exist and not burn down inexplicably, at the weekend or overnight. And it's come full circle. We started out stealing data to sell it and to capitalize upon the sale of that, and now the biggest and quickest and the easiest payout you can get is by just saying, "Oh, we got your stuff, by the way. So first, do you want it decrypted? If you want it, it's this price. And by the way, if you don't pay us, we've had a look through it, and there's all kinds of good stuff in there that the world at large is going to have great fun with you with. And don't forget your compliance problems with GDPR and other stuff like that. You can pay us again."
Actually, I going back a bit to the history of ransomware. Basically, in about 10 years ago, more or less, the main threat that was raging, which is still present but a bit more under the radar, were banking trojans, which basically tried to redirect transactions right to mule accounts and stuff like that. And it was, I think, in 2014 when the botnet CryptoLocker, I believe, was taken down, and the earnings of the operator, Slavic, I think, were revealed, in which it was shown that he earned something close to, I believe, $3 million in about 12 months, something like that, that triggered this ransomware boom that has lived on until now with all of these improvements like double extortion and triple extortion, and has professionalized so much. Right now, a ransomware gang that will extort you twice for the money will lose on reputation, and people will stop paying those ransomware gangs the ransom money because they know they will get extorted again. Nowadays, the landscape that we have, the threat landscape that we have, ransomware-wise, is that the big groups are structured and maintained so as to keep their reputation and to make sure that clients, as they call them, are satisfied with their service.
They even offer support.
Yeah, they have 24/7 support many times, so that you're able to dialogue with them and try to negotiate. Different groups have different politics about this. Some of them allow you to sort of try to reduce the payout. Others, when they realize, if, for example, hired a threat intelligence company, will just up the pricing to make you pay.
Yeah. Absolutely. And back to the ecosystem, and it hasn't changed much, at least not in my research. And Victor, I'm interested to hear what you have to say after I kind of run through this. But on one side of the fence, you've got all of the as a service element now of the underworld. Okay, so people that create malware tools, phishing campaigns, get keyloggers out there, botnet services, malware distribution services, data acquisition. The list goes on. It's incredible what you can get now for just $50, $25. And then you get into the kind of the mid tier, right? That kind of the people that like might mine the data they've got, validate some of the data they have in terms of credit card numbers, have they been used before, and then try to see which one would be feasible to use at payment gateways, etc., and how they can extort the money. And then you have this whole data sales element, which kind of moves across into the kind of the users, right? And if an organization has been breached or a bank, there are even people that will be the money mules, right? They'll go and withdraw the cash if it's one of those types of attacks, or they don't have much anymore, and they'll go and do the physical transactions, and they'll get paid a cut of it. But if they get caught, who cares? Because the master criminals behind it in this ecosystem don't really mind because they're protected. And then you've got, and this is the reason I opened up with why I think nation state is a big challenge. Is I've just been seeing a swell of activity this past decade that concerns me significantly. And it's the Chinese APT groups more so than anywhere else. And I don't want to move the conversation to another topic, but it is kind of psychology, is, in 2020, right, the top 5 APT groups that targeted education in the UK were Chinese APT groups, right? And they still, I think 4 of the top 10 now are still Chinese APT groups, right? You heard about the Chinese 500-year plan, et cetera, et cetera. If I look at most of the intellectual property theft analyses, you're going to go and see that the Chinese APT groups again are up there. Now Russia's not far behind. And so that's got to tell you a story, right? As an organizations, yes, you use the data and credit card data and personal identifying information. That's all good stuff. We don't want to lose that. I mean, but look at the top breaches of the 21st century. Yahoo down to LinkedIn to people have your data. If you don't think you haven't had your data pawned somewhere, then you might be remiss of logic in many respects, or you might just be lucky maybe you haven't. So your data's out there, right? Your date of birth, your last passport copy. Marriott got breached, right? If you're part of Star Wars Preferred Guest, you had your passport in there. I did. So that data's there. So what's going to give these organizations the edge? And I say organizations, sort of nation state. It's been able to control the kind of psyche of a particular demographic or population. And I'd like to talk about TikTok in a moment as well, in terms of kind of what it is that we need to be worried about, and then the psychology driving it. But what I'm seeing is a lot of intellectual property theft and education-based targeted stuff from Chinese APT groups, a massive political unrest globally. And people know, these groups know a lot more about individuals than they ever have done in the history of cybercrime. So it's going to be very easy now to start to build a campaign that really does start to affect the core of people's belief systems. And for me, from a psychological perspective, whether you're a business, whether you're an individual, it doesn't matter. You're living in a world where you really do have to be very careful about the data you consume and what it is, what the effect is on you, because it isn't just about the money anymore, guys. It's about controlling people's views and thoughts on very, very key issues globally. And I know I've probably gone a little bit left field, James, but I'd love to see what Victor thinks about kind of some of that mindset of the psychology of the attacker.
No, definitely. We already live in the era of disinformation, right? In which news sources will try to move your political gauge one side or to the other with outrageous articles. Half of it probably made up with information or with private identifier information that can be collected from educational systems. They can and have already influenced politics and the choices made by governments all around the world, and not only China, Russia as well, as you say. And I think that even though I know this is a bit of a touchy subject, we've seen something very similar in the US with the aftermath of the last election. So it is a very real threat, a very real issue. the thing that worries me about is that there's not much companies can do against this type of threats, right? The main access vectors nowadays are still the ones that were there like 10 years ago, which are known vulnerabilities, phishing attacks and stolen passwords, right? But usually these sort of APTs, they go one step beyond that, right? They're using 0 days for software you didn't know you have that it's vulnerable. They are using and employees from within the company to infect the company itself, people who may have gambling debts, people who may have issues with financial issues of some sort, and trying to leverage that to gain access to the company. And protecting against that is much, much, much harder than protecting against a stolen password or a known vulnerability that has been published. And because your update policy is not as good as it should be, you get targeted and you get broken into, right?
It's frightening, actually, because, when you look at it in the grand scheme of things, we're seeing a dramatic increase in the shift in the speed of how people are developing new ways to really, really, well, let's face it, screw someone over, screw an organization over, screw a nation state over. Richard, I mean, yeah, the theft of IP, it's kind of hard to quantify sometimes, the theft of, if a nation state gets hold of, a new IP before it's kind of necessarily come out, they will capitalize on it because, let's face it, they've nicked it. And we all know the old story of the, China with Rover, I think it was, where it was like, we're going to sue you because you've built, a car exactly the same as the Rover, and the Chinese judge saying looks nothing like a Rover, and boom, there you go, that's it, that's done with it. No argument anymore. But also, deep fakes are starting to become a big thing now. Video clips of somebody doing something that they shouldn't be doing is becoming a distinct issue. The whole kind of meddling with elections, or alleged meddling with elections. We're seeing a lot more of that. We're seeing a lot more of manipulation of media. We're living in a world where the one wrong turn, as I say, a celebrity, an influencer or whatever, and it could be nothing that you've done or said, but just implied that you were involved with, and boom, cancel culture kicks in, you're cancelled, everybody you associated with has been tarred with the same brush. Before you know it, your employer's getting rid of you because you're a liability for them. You're never going to get another job again. The organization is tarred with the same brush, and there's a lot of damage that can be done in a world where we rely on, in many respects, information and hearsay and just being implied on stuff that you've done wrong. We worry today really about ransomware and things like IP theft, but where does this really go? And when one of the things I like about what you said earlier on, Richard, was the psychology behind it. The psychology of the people who are doing this today is extremely different from when you were back in your, sort of like small groups of hackers. Because the term hacker isn't derogatory originally. It's just a group of people who are trying to manipulate something to do something it shouldn't be able to do for either shits and giggles or out of interest to see what you could do with it. Nowadays, that term is a very, very different term. We call them malicious actors quite often in the industry now, rather than hackers. But the media likes to sensationalize everything. But we are seeing this significant shift in the types of attacks, the way attacks happen, the speed of attacks. I was, weirdly enough, Richard, speaking with one of your colleagues, Oliver, the other week, along with John from John Kerr, about machine learning and artificial intelligence. And we did a two-parter where one side of it was, how are we going to use it, sitting on the light side of the fence, the light side of the force, I like to term it. But then what happens when the bad guys get hold of it? Because you can bet your bottom dollar they've got every bit as the same technology that we have. It's just the way they use it and the scruples behind it is very different. And a lot of these guys who are coming into it now and have been coming into it for a while have had very much, dare I say it, and I'm a gamer. I'm an old school gamer. I love me old computer games. Yes, I'm a bit of a geek. I think most people in this game have been at some point or still are. But the gamer mentality that came up, the really dangerous mentality of, well, I'm just going to do it for the sake of it because, hey, I can. That's actually seemingly starting to come into it as well. There's no consequences anymore. You're not, the people are swatting one another, for Christ's sake. They're saying that this guy's going to shoot a load of people, and before you know it, on camera, a team of very heavily armed individuals are storming the house and threatening to do somebody some injury. It's frightening. We talk about access brokers, and we should sort of pull back to the whole how criminals work. It used to be like one group of people who used to do something. They used to work tight knit together, but now it's more a bit like how, say, the Yakuza used to work, which is very more organizational bent. You have the people who are developers, working together to develop new malware, new ways of getting into places, new ways to utilize vulnerabilities. You have entire groups of people who just look into the health of a company. What kind of insurance have they got? Can they pay if we ransomware them? How viable are they for paying up? Are they going to pay up? Is there historic where they turned around and they said they wouldn't? You have them, obviously, the management and the teams at the top who are kind of coordinating everybody and pulling in all the different people's kind of information, accessing the access brokers to access things. And again, Victor, something you said as well, another big danger is, that I'm starting to see is there's a lot of internal people who are not being paid very well. We're living in a time where inflation's starting to go crazy and people can't afford to feed their kids, and it's getting worse and worse and worse. And being told, I'll give you 20 grand if you give us access to the systems. That's all you got to do. Give us access, we'll give you 20 grand in Bitcoin or 20 grand in Ethereum or whatever.
Yeah, not even that. It's sometimes even a smaller sum, and the only thing they ask of you is that you plug in a USB that they will send you, or that you just click on a website or a link they've shared with you through your email. And that's usually enough.
Yeah, but doesn't that talk to? This is the great point. The rules of engagement have changed. The psychology of the attacker. You wouldn't have even dreamed of that stuff 15 years ago. It would have been, it was all about intellectual bragging rights and your hacker community social score. Now it's completely different. Groups are targeting your children at home to get them to download software or whatever it is to gain access to, corporate systems. There really is the boundaries that used to exist about who attackers went after and why. They've been blurred massively. To your point, it's let's just go after the weakest employee, the one that we know is searching for home loans for whatever, or taking out payday loans. We know they're in a bit of a pickle. Paying $5,000, as Victor said, to stick in a USB key, and my God, you probably save tens of thousands in research and development work as the hacker group to try to get into the organization. The rules of engagement have changed, and that's one of the bigger concerns for organizations as well.
Do you think it's changed also because obviously, we live in very much an outsourced environment now? I mean, again, go back, I sound really old now, go back sort of 15, 20 years, you had your IT team. Yeah, sometimes you'd have a third-party support company, you'd have companies that provided you with software, that kind of thing. But now it's all as a service model where, you may not even have an IT team, you may outsource it completely. And some of those people are in parts of the world where, let's face it, wages aren't exactly the greatest at the best of times. And there's a big argument over whether they're being exploited or whether they're not. But it's frightening how it can rapidly go downhill for any organization. Yes, you're cost saving extensively by going to the cloud and getting somebody to do your incident response here and getting somebody over here to do your third line support and your second line support over in parts of the world. You're giving some of them admin access to be able to do stuff, and it's just increasing the attack vectors. The landscape is dramatically moving. We've got more and more inroads in our network infrastructures. I mean, just look at SolarWinds. One hack, boom. Epic amounts of companies being, getting involved.
Yeah, the supply chain attacks that are on the rise, definitely, and it's all thanks to all of these, let's say, collaboration between companies. But at the same time, because of the rhythm that the companies have, I think the way the technology evolves, many companies cannot afford, to have their own security team developing their own internal tools to be able to maintain that security, which is why it's so important to understand where your threats are, right? Whose target you are, who is most likely to attack you, because in the end, and all security risks that you may have within your company end up being, as we said at the beginning, a business risk, right? Understanding these sort of attacks and how they happen is how you stop them, is how you prevent them.
Yeah, to Victor's point, one of the things I've always advocated, if for any CISO I've ever spoken to, right, your first job is to understand what you're protecting and who you're protecting it from. Okay, once you know that, then you need to know where it sits, et cetera, et cetera. And I think, if maybe the psychology of attacker, this podcast has probably scared the socks off of you about that, there's nothing you can do, it's all going to happen anyway. That's not the case. That's not what Victor and I are saying. What we're saying is you've got to understand what your true business risk is. So you've got to know what kind of organization you're operating as and what kind of things would represent a bad day for your organization, what those assets are. And don't just think of digital assets, okay? It's also people as well, because, going after individuals, as we've already shown you, is as easy as it was today and it's ever been. So know what you're protecting and who, and then you can start to map who you're protecting it from. And, and you can play the game out. You can even map it back to the types of APT groups and their techniques, tactics, procedures. So you can actually build a very viable cybersecurity program. And more importantly, one that you can validate and consistently improve. Don't just put something in and then think, this drives me nuts, right? Organizations buy products for 3 to 5 year life cycles. So they put a product in at day one, they go, right, that's it. For 3 years, this is going to protect me. It's like,
we're safe.
It's incredible that you run a business like that. Since when has cybersecurity tactics and APT groups stayed? I mean, yes, they do similar things, but they change at a rate of automation and speed. You have to constantly reevaluate if the tech's good and if it isn't. And if it's not good in 6 months, it's not good in 6 months. Change it, because at the end of the day, it's your business and your job on the line. Forget the solution lifecycle and accounting sign-off period. So, I'm backing up what Victor's saying by trying to bring it back to how do you solve the problem? How does that psychology map back to your business outcomes? And it really is, what am I protecting? Where is it? And that leads to who you're protecting from.
And a wise man once wrote in a very, very ancient piece of text, if you know yourself, then you'll win half your battles. But if you know your enemy and yourself, you'll win all your battles. Well, maybe not all of them, but you'll have a pretty good chance of surviving it intact. And at the end of the day, the way we look at security has to change, and it has been changing for a while to keep up. Because, again, you make a good point, Richard. We're not trying to scare you guys out there who are listening to this. We're just trying to give you an idea of really what these people who are doing this are kind of looking for. What's their mentality? Why are they doing it? What are the kind of targets they look for? What weak links do they look for? Because that's what they're looking for quite often. And once they're in, they're in. There's nothing you can do. All you can do is respond to it and hope that it's not going to be too bad. But
James, are the weak links any different today as they were 10 years ago? No. Right?
I don't.
This is the issue. This is the takeaway for me. It's the users are still your weak link, right? They always will be. They're targeted more so now than ever before. And also your credentials and making sure you've patched these systems that are sitting in the corner that are still talking to the internet. Still the same entry points, still the same threat vectors. But what you have to do as a business leader and an owner of cybersecurity, in my experience, from the countless breaches I've investigated and drilled down to component parts, is knowing those assets that are going to be targeted and putting the best possible protection framework that doesn't just sit there from day one and, as I said, runs for 3 years and you don't change it. You're constantly evaluating what's changing, what's new. And machine learning is a good example of how you can use technology to really supercharge your ability to detect what's different and react to that quickly.
Absolutely. The rate of change, the rate that things are going, the way that we're consuming our technology. I think I think the one aspect that has changed very much from historical ways of doing it is the way that we're so distributed now. And it's hard to track where sometimes issues come from. If you've got millions of service providers all having their, maybe not millions, but a lot of service providers interacting with your environment in some fashion or another, along with everybody working from home, and we haven't even touched on that, perimeters have just been horribly smashed. And it goes back to, there used to be a group called the Jericho Forum. I don't know if they're still around. I haven't really looked into them. They probably have. But way back when after I first got into security, I looked at what they were saying, which was ignore the perimeter, concentrate on the assets, which is exactly what we do today. And I thought they were crazy. I thought, no, can't do that. But boy, have they been proved right. And yeah, it's. I think it's frightening the fact that you can have a breach and it could be none of your employees. It could be none of the employees of your service provider, but it could be an employee of the service provider of the service provider of the service provider that you have, or the people who developed the original code somewhere back down the line. And you'll never know, because again, one of the things that we always say when we're doing work with any customer is, if you've got service providers, have the right to audit and make sure it goes down the chain as well. Because when you're doing investigations, it's tough enough to figure out what's happened and where it's happened. Okay, our tools are a lot more robust these days. I know both of you have had the joy of getting the massive set of logs and trying to find the tiny little needle of truth somewhere in the in the hideous log pile. Now we've got the ability to do it a lot quicker, and as you say, Richard, with machine learning, that's going to get even quicker and quicker and quicker and quicker, to the point where I think it's going to get easier. But without robust links with the service providers and the ability to work together to figure out where issues have gone, I think it's going to get much, much harder to figure out whether it was an issue with an individual giving up credentials to an access broker, or being an access broker, or a disgruntled employee, or a fundamentalist who worked for a company who was owned by a nation state, who got annoyed by said nation state, and before you know it, boom, I'll give you guys access to all their systems. I don't know where we go from here. It's quite frightening.
I believe it was in 2003 that Google published their Zero Trust paper. I think that's where we should be already, right? Identify assets, not don't trust the perimeter. Identify the asset that's connecting, not the person. That's the right way to go.
I agree. One of the things that does worry me a little bit with some of the zero trust side of things is a little bit more along the lines of we need to be careful how we do that, because it makes things difficult to do. It makes it difficult for people to work in a way that's adaptive, quick, robust, because having too much security is every bit as damaging as having too little. Too much security and people can't do what they need to do. Too little security and you're just going to get done over,
Yeah, and that's what technology needs to adapt and to speed up. Windows 11 can only be installed now on devices that have a TPM. Me, from a personal point of view, that's something that horrifies me. But as a security person, I think, look, now I can identify the devices of my employees, making sure that they are connecting to the AD from their laptop, not from anywhere else, right? They can identify that laptop connecting to, any other place. So I think it's a matter of technology growing in that direction as well, and making things easier for the user as well as harder for the attacker. It's a compromise we have to reach.
Yeah. I think, summarize some of these points, at least from my perspective, for the listener. The what we're up against is a scale of economy problem, right? Yes, cybercrime is largely driven by money, and people want to get rewards in a monetary basis for their efforts. And we know that, right? And so that means no business is safe from any of this. We know that. We're all cybersecurity people. We get it. But I think what we are seeing, and to Victor's point, is a a change in the pace of entry points and the age. A lot of people getting in much more easily, much more in an automated fashion. It means that there's a lot more breach activities that can go on in a shorter space of time. So you're going to see a lot more activity, a lot more noise. And then you've got the geopolitical climate that we're in. You know, the whatever it is, whether it's the current Ukraine-Russia war, whether it's the distrust of pharmaceuticals, whether it's whatever it might be, there is a real big resurgence of hacktivism. So what does that mean, right? The psychology of those attackers, whilst mostly driven by money, now we're seeing more being driven by socioeconomic, socio-political policy. And so as a business, just back to my original point, what do I do as a business? What are my assets? What am I protecting? Really understand and answer that question. If you don't know what you've got, go get tools that do it. There's some great technologies out there off the shelf that will tell you what you have and where you have it and what state it's in, right? And once you've built that picture, then you can start to put the security policies around it to help fight these attackers and the mindsets of these attackers. And as we've all agreed on this podcast, don't just sit pretty. Don't sit there and think you've done it. Once you've spent, $1 million, pounds, euros, dollars on your technology, constantly reassess what's going on and using automation to do that. But it comes back to, they want your money, they want your data. You need to know what data you have and what they're likely to come after, and then how you protect it. That's the answer to the psychology of the attacker, in my opinion.
Just out of interest, I mean, obviously, you guys both come from good companies with a lot of intel. I mean, what's the projected cost of cybercrime going to be in, I don't know, sort of next year, 5 years? I mean, I've seen some figures banding around various different sort of media environments, but I thought I'd finish off or come to before we hit the final conclusions, hit you guys and see, what are you seeing? Just as a sobering thought for people listening to this.
On my side, not sure about the forecast, but I can tell you that this year we've seen, in average, I believe, 43 leaked, 43 companies being breached and their information being leaked every week. So 43 a week for 52 weeks that we have. And that's only the ones that get publicized. Now think about all of those that actually pay for the ransom. Right? Or that get breached, but there's not enough data for them to make it worth it, or for the attacker to leverage it against them. That's a lot of people getting breached every week, honestly, James. And unless people start, working a bit better around their security and taking things seriously, and stop thinking this won't happen to me, I think the number will go up.
Yeah. I mean, look, the figures are wild, right? I mean, I've seen figures as low as, 354 million by 2024. I've seen figures as high as 10.5 trillion by 2025. But I always find these figures a misnomer to the person or the persons that make a decision organization, right? Because 10.5 trillion means really not a great deal to you. I think to Victor's point, it's where the activities are at their highest, where we're seeing a swell of activity that creates the financial kind of fallout that we're facing. And so coming back to business mindset, I always try to do a force multiplier when I'm talking to organizations about this. I say, look, forget that, certain groups say 10.5 trillion by 2025. You need to work that back to what it's going to cost you. So, what is it when you can't, sell products for a day or for an hour, okay?
Yeah.
Or what would happen if your CISO or your CEO or whatever lost access to their systems? And by the way, it isn't an easy exercise to go through, but it's super critical to do, because then you can start to monetize the cost of a breach of an account for your top executives or the person who runs your AD infrastructure and identity access management across your cloud service provider environment, right? And run the spreadsheet and then see, to Victor's point earlier, where your biggest business risks sit. And then you can work out what that cost is to you, because that's really what you care about, because that's what you're making spending and project decisions on. So that's how I would approach the cost of cybercrime as a business, because looking at numbers in the industry, I mean, it could be double that by 2025. We just don't know.
Absolutely, and you make a good point, and definitely one for another podcast actually on risk management and the importance of quantification as much as qualification. Because I think a lot of people don't calculate the recovery costs, they don't calculate the lost productivity, and the especially with things like ransomware, where they've encrypted everything. It could take a long time, as the Colonial Pipeline found out. So leading into the closing thoughts, we've kind of hit the top of it. I mean, where do we go from here? I mean, I think the central message we all seem to have is, look at your assets, secure based off of assets, and take security seriously, which is a great message. But how do we communicate that to the wider business world at large? Because I think one of the things that all security people who have been around for a while have experienced is that tough. And it was something that Victor said, actually, this will never happen to me. What's the risk? What's the cost? Why would we be targeted? All of this comes down to what are your thoughts? Where do we go from here? Who wants to go first? Richard? You go. Yeah, go on, Richard.
So look, the art of negotiation to your board or to your management is all about how well you tell the story, right? Tell me a fact, I remember for a day. Tell me a story, I remember for a lifetime. And I do think, the schools of, MBAs and stuff are focusing too much on metrics and facts and figures, when actually the psychology of the attacker is a story that plays itself out in nefarious and insidious ways. So you can't just come to the board and say, I need, half £1,000,000 or euros or dollars or whatever, because I think we need this product, without selling them the big picture, without telling them what's going on in the world currently, what are the latest APT groups that would focus on my industry doing, what are the major breaches that have been behind it. And as a result of that, these are the assets that I know that will give our business the worst possible day in our history should they be compromised. And so therefore, if we spend X, we reduce risk by a factor of Y, right? And cyber insurance is one of the conversations. But you can't just go in and say, I need money to add this product because it will save me from what I may not be affected by. You have to tell the story about the current cybercrime landscape and really make it personal to your board, to your decision makers. That's when they start to get on board with the mission you're trying to solve. And it isn't just about making budget decisions, because too many businesses make cybersecurity decisions on budget and not actually on the real world and what's going on today.
Yeah, I agree 100%. As I'm not sure if you've ever been ISO certified, but the first step is always get management on board, And for security, it's always the same. Go to them with a story, explain properly the risk it poses, make them understand the cost this may have for you and for your company.
And if they don't listen, fine.
You've done your job.
Exactly.
Yeah.
You've told them.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, guys, it's been fantastic. And I think this is probably a subject matter that we're going to have to revisit from time to time. It's, we within security, you're used to a fast evolving pace, and the way that people, secure their environments, what you have to do to secure your environments, but understanding the criminal element behind it, what their goals and what they're looking to do, also changes over time and can evolve quite dramatically and quite quickly. And in order to, as we said with the Sun Tzu quote earlier on, you've got to know your enemy as much as you know yourself to be able to win that battle. And it is a battle. And it's a battle that's not going to stop. No one's going to win this. It's going on and on and on. It's just changing every so often. Anyway, thank you, guys. It's been an absolute pleasure. Richard, Victor, hope you've had a good time. No doubt we'll have you back for various other topics and maybe even this topic again.
Yeah, look forward to it. Yeah, absolutely.
Thank you very much for having us, James.
Yeah,
it's been a pleasure, Richard.
Yeah, you too, Victor. Great speaking with you. Appreciate it as well, James. Thank you.
All right.
Fantastic. And for all of you out there, thank you for listening in. Please feel free to subscribe. And if you want to get in contact with us for us to cover anything or you've got any questions, no doubt you'll find in the descriptor or in various other means, the message, the way to get hold of us, and feel free to get in touch. We always like feedback. So thank you very much, and look after yourselves out there.